In the open sea, with Roman forces on the brink of a decisive confrontation, the fate of the empire was sealed by a battle that would change everything. The Battle of Actium wasn't just a power struggle between Octavian and Mark Antony. It was the moment when the Roman navy showcased its relentless strength. What made this fleet so pivotal? How did the course of a single naval battle define Rome's future and bring an end to Cleopatra and Antony's reign? Today, you'll discover how the waters of Actium became the stage for the rise of Rome's first emperor. And believe me, the story behind this victory is more astonishing than you might imagine. At the end of the 1st century BC, Rome was engulfed in a brutal civil war that pitted two of the most powerful men of the time against each other, Octavian and Mark Antony. Following Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, the fate of the Roman Republic became uncertain, triggering a struggle for control that would result in an empire. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, and Mark Antony, his longtime ally and trusted general, initially formed an alliance in the Second Triumvirate alongside Lepidus. However, this alliance quickly deteriorated, primarily due to their ambitions and the personal relationships involved. Mark Antony, already known for his military victories in the East, became romantically involved with Cleopatra, the famous queen of Egypt. This alliance was viewed with suspicion by Octavian and the Roman Senate, who began to see Antony as a threat not only politically but culturally, fearing that Cleopatra's Eastern influence could corrupt the Roman spirit. Antony's marriage to Cleopatra, while ignoring his union with Octavian's sister, Octavia, was the spark that ignited the final breakup. Tensions escalated rapidly into open war, with both sides mustering forces for the confrontation that would decide Rome's future. Octavian, being a shrewd politician, skillfully used propaganda to his advantage, portraying Antony as a traitor who had strayed from Roman values alongside Cleopatra. This narrative strengthened Octavian's support in the Senate and among the Roman people. Meanwhile, Mark Antony, increasingly reliant on Egypt's resources and armies, saw his position weaken. Although he still held considerable power, his situation began to deteriorate when several legions and Roman allies defected to Octavian's side, recognizing the instability of the alliance between Antony and Cleopatra. As the armies of both sides prepared for battle, the war was not just a personal power struggle, but a fight over the future of Rome. On one side, Octavian advocated for the ideal of a unified and powerful Rome under his command. On the other, Antony, allied with Cleopatra, represented a potential fusion between the West and the East, something many Romans viewed as an existential threat. The initial battles occurred on land, but both knew that the true decisive battlefield would be at sea, where the navy would be crucial to success. Tensions culminated in 31 BC, as preparations for the decisive confrontation at Actium took place. Octavian, with his commander Agrippa, had built a powerful and well-equipped fleet. Antony, in turn, relied on his captain's skills and Cleopatra's resources. However, there was a fundamental difference in preparation. While Octavian had a disciplined and focused fleet, the alliance between Antony and Cleopatra began to show cracks, with discontented officers and declining morale. The Roman navy was about to determine the fate of both sides. Octavian knew that to defeat Mark Antony, he needed to dominate the sea. The war had spread across land, but the decisive battle would be fought on the waters. Octavian's navy, commanded by the brilliant General Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, was built with a clear strategy to outnumber and outmaneuver Antony's naval force. Agrippa not only modernized the fleet, but also employed new tactics that would make the Roman navy unbeatable in direct confrontation. They were ready to face any threat, utilizing lighter and more agile ships that could flank and surround Antony's heavier vessels. Octavian's fleet, composed of triremes and quadriremes, excelled in maneuverability. Agrippa developed tactics that allowed for quick and efficient strikes, taking advantage of the mobility of the smaller ships. Additionally, Octavian's navy was equipped with the corvus, a device that enabled Roman ships to latch onto enemy vessels, allowing soldiers to board directly onto adversarial ships, transforming naval combat into hand-to-hand fighting, where the Romans were experts. This neutralized the advantages of larger, heavier ships, which struggled to maneuver in confined spaces. Another crucial aspect of Octavian's strategy was securing control of supply routes. While Mark Antony prepared for a prolonged war, Octavian, with Agrippa's help, began cutting off his enemies' supply lines. Agrippa led decisive operations to capture coastal cities and strategic ports like Patras and Corinth, which were vital for supplying Antony's troops. With Antony's fleet gradually isolated and his ground forces weakened, the morale of his soldiers and sailors began to plummet, giving Octavian a psychological edge even before the final battle. Despite Octavian's preparations, Mark Antony still had a respectable fleet, bolstered by Cleopatra's resources from Egypt. However, the difference in leadership made all the difference. While Agrippa and Octavian remained focused on the military campaign, Mark Antony faced internal divisions, with officers and governors increasingly dissatisfied with his alliance with Cleopatra. This caused Antony's strategies to become less cohesive, and the confidence among his commanders dissipated. Cleopatra, a queen and political strategist, also influenced naval decisions, but her military inexperience contributed to less effective choices. Thus, Octavian and Agrippa, with a superior navy and an effective siege strategy, were ready for the final clash. Octavian's naval force was well positioned, both in terms of discipline and morale. The battle at Actium was about to unfold, and the fate of Rome, Egypt, and the entire Mediterranean region hung in the balance. The stage was set for a confrontation that would forever change the history of the ancient world. The union between Mark Antony and Cleopatra was not just a romantic alliance, but a crucial political partnership that shaped the landscape of the Roman Civil War. Cleopatra, one of the shrewdest rulers of Egypt, saw in Mark Antony an opportunity to consolidate power in the eastern Mediterranean. By providing Antony with resources, ships, and troops, she hoped to strengthen her own kingdom and ensure Egypt's survival against Roman expansion. However, this alliance proved to be a turning point, both politically and militarily, for Antony, whose connection to the Egyptian queen was viewed with suspicion and disdain in Rome. Cleopatra brought not only wealth, but also the promise of a great naval fleet, which was crucial to Antony's plan to defeat Octavian. However, this same alliance with a foreign power began to undermine the support Antony had among the Romans. The idea of a Rome led by a leader closely tied to a foreign, Eastern queen was skillfully used by Octavian in his propaganda. He portrayed Antony as a traitor who had abandoned Roman values and succumbed to the luxury and corruption of the East, leaving the fate of the Republic in Cleopatra's hands. This rhetoric not only diminished Antony's standing among his allies, but also incited mass desertions to Octavian's side. Despite the growing political pressure, the partnership between Antony and Cleopatra remained strong until the final moments. Cleopatra, more than just a military ally, acted as a strategic advisor and financier of the war. She believed that a victory over Octavian could mean not only the survival of her kingdom, but also the elevation of Mark Antony as the supreme ruler of Rome, thereby ensuring her own security and influence. However, the weight of this alliance soon showed its downside, as Antony's generals and commanders began to doubt Cleopatra's influence on military decisions, further weakening the morale of his forces. During the preparations for the Battle of Actium, Cleopatra's presence was a double-edged sword. Although her fleet was a valuable resource, the influence she had over Antony led many of his officers to question his priorities. The internal division within Antony's ranks became even more evident as Cleopatra started actively participating in strategic decisions. This generated discontent among his commanders, who were not pleased with a foreign queen making decisions on the battlefield. The trust between Antony and his generals began to fragment, directly affecting the performance of his troops. This alliance, which initially promised an unbeatable force, became a decisive factor in Mark Antony's failure. The divided loyalty between following a military leader or a foreign queen destabilized his forces, while Octavian, with his unified command and strategically positioned fleet, prepared for the final attack. The moment of truth was near, and Mark Antony and Cleopatra, once symbols of power and ambition, were about to face ruin. The morning of September 2nd, 31 BC, marked the beginning of the Battle of Actium, one of the most decisive confrontations in ancient history. Octavian's fleet, led by Agrippa, was strategically positioned, controlling the exits of the Gulf of Actium, where Mark Antony and Cleopatra had anchored their forces. Agrippa, a master of naval tactics, used the terrain to his advantage, blocking Antony's escape routes and ensuring that the battle would be fought in a location where his more agile ships would have the upper hand. Antony's fleet, on the other hand, composed of large warships, was less maneuverable and vulnerable to the agility of the Roman vessels. Antony's tactics proved problematic from the start. Instead of utilizing Cleopatra's vast Egyptian fleet to reinforce his position, he chose to position it in the rear, creating a divide among his forces. This crucial decision allowed Agrippa to exploit the gaps in Antony's defense, launching concentrated attacks on the weaker areas of the fleet. The Roman ships, equipped with the corvus, quickly began boarding Antony's vessels, turning the naval battle into a direct infantry confrontation at sea, where Octavian's legions held a clear advantage. For hours, the clash intensified, with both sides' fleets suffering heavy losses. However, while Octavian and his commanders maintained cohesion and control over their troops, Mark Antony's fleet began to crumble. The most decisive moment came when Cleopatra, realizing the battle was lost, decided to withdraw her fleet from combat and retreat to Egypt. The sudden departure of the queen morally weakened Antony's forces, who, seeing their main ally abandon the battlefield, found themselves isolated and surrounded. Many of his officers, recognizing the imminent defeat, followed Cleopatra's example and also deserted. Chaos quickly ensued among Antony's ranks. While some of his ships attempted to hold out, others began to surrender to Octavian's forces. Agrippa, noticing the enemy's disarray, intensified the attacks, surrounding the last remaining ships of Antony. The Roman leader, who had tried to keep fighting until then, decided to flee, following Cleopatra toward Egypt. The Battle of Actium was practically decided, and the battlefield now clearly demonstrated the tactical and organizational superiority of Octavian and his navy. Mark Antony's defeat at Actium was not just a military failure, but also the breaking point for his political power. Octavian, on the other hand, emerged as the supreme commander of Rome, ready to consolidate his dominance over the Republic. The Roman navy, under Agrippa's command, had proven its worth, destroying Antony's fleet and securing Octavian's future as the first emperor of Rome. The fate of the empire was sealed, and the waters of Actium witnessed the end of one era and the birth of another.